That's it.
Okay, I just wanted to re-ask, I know we talked about this last week. I just wanted to confirm, this spreadsheet you sent out, I understand that this is what you're presenting over to Chris Martin, um, who will then probably share it with the Finance Committee and Select Board. I don't see Stephanie on here, and I did just see her name pop up on Facebook. I don't know if she was trying to find out. Anyways, this represents a 2% decrease, right? Not the 5%?
Correct.
Okay. And this 2% decrease, just for reiteration, is not something that we're agreeing to do. It's just I don't want to use the word mocked up because it could become a reality, or parts of it could become a reality, but it really is a way to get to a 2% decrease if we really need to get there with what the town has asked us to do. Is that correct?
Correct. What the town has to do, because we do not have numbers from the governor or the legislature, because we don't have revenue, we have to have a 1/12 budget, and that 1/12 budget is based on FY20. So in addition, the ask from the town was to use FY20 and reduce 2% to that. And so that's what you see here.
Okay. And again,
now I think, you know, there was discussion at the select board, and we've had this discussion. You know, we're not like all other departments. We don't, our revenue picture is a little different. So our FY21 net school spending, as you remember, was significantly increased, upwards of, you know, $250,000. So, you know, the legislature still has to, you know, come up with what that net school spending for FY21 is going to be, if there's going to be any reduction at all, along with Chapter 70. So, you know, these, you know, we're in a very, we're in almost a vacuum. There's a lack of information. There's no decision making being made, but we're faced with, you know, trying to have at least 3 months of a budget, you know, that is based on FY20 at this point.
yeah, and I did ask, or I did state in the last week's meeting, my hope is that we as a town, not just as a school committee, but we as a town, don't rush into doing something just for the sake of having something done until we know that we have as much information as we're possibly going to get. Meaning, we really shouldn't be trying to pass a budget, in my opinion, until we know if there's going to be any more aid from the Fed coming, what the state's numbers really truly look like versus what's in the newspapers and what they're rumored to be. That's my hope, and my thought here is, while this is needed by the town to kind of get a line in the sand and understand what one line of thought might be, I just want to keep saying over and over that this is not really our proposed budget, a proposed revision to our budget. This is just the answer to an ask by the town to say, if we were to cut by 2%, what would it look like, right?
Well, 2% to FY20.
Okay, 2% to FY20. Now, that being said, the two items that are highlighted in yellow, are those being cut? Because I see how you're looking like you're going to cut them, but then it says the position will be funded through a grant or through revolving. So I'm a little unsure if those will truly be cut or what the plan is.
So they are cut from the budget total, but then we fund them through grants or revolving accounts. So, you know, one of the goals of the strategic plan is to have a year in arrear for revolving accounts. This would bring us under that year in arrear, but given the situation that we're facing, it's probably a wise decision. Not something that's sustainable long term, but it can certainly be a bridge to hopefully what is improved financial picture, both for the state and the town, if not in FY22, in FY23.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat this back in my own simple little terms so that I can make sure I understand it. These are being cut from the budget. The budget gets passed, and then we say, but hold on, we want to keep these two positions. We're going to pay for them out of this pool of funds and not our budget funds. It's kind of the rainy day fund.
Right.
Is not, now, if this is not what we call a rainy day, then I'm not really sure.
Right. Yeah.
For a rainy day, right?
Yes.
Okay, I've got that straight in my head. I'm going to now open it up to the other people on the committee who've had a chance to review this for their questions. And I know, Emery, you had a few. I think you sent an email, and I think some of those were answered, but I don't know if you have any follow-ups. But go ahead.
I just want to just kind of make something not clear, but just so we understand, right? I don't want to necessarily call these cuts yet, kind of to Mike's points. I would just call them reductions to our operating budget at this point, because there may be a way that we can fund all of these, some of these, none of these with revolving accounts. So maybe we should stay away from cuts and just say we're reducing our operating budget at this point, because again, we may be able to find other funding to recoup some of these reductions. So I just want to, again, I don't want to make it clear. I know it's certainly clear. I just want to make sure we understand that they're reductions at this point, proposed reductions to our operating budget.
Okay.
So I'm just going to ask right out. So proposed reductions of $120,000 to athletics is more than what I saw on the version of the budget that I had for athletics of $99,000. So I'm not sure if I'm looking at the most accurate one. I was chatting with Cheryl about that when we first came online, but the one that I had was from the February 20th meeting. I know we had done some other stuff to it, but that was the only one that I could put my hands on. And it showed, oh, I apologize. So athletics is 146, so 120 from athletics, but that personnel was 99,000. So I'm not sure how we would, how would that work? I messed up my question.
So, and again, I just want to say these are rounded numbers. So it might say 119 on the budget that you see, but I tried to keep these in whole rounded numbers just to keep it clean looking. So
okay,
just want to throw that out there.
So what if we just stay with athletics, if we want to go right down the line, what is that? What's going to look like if this reduction comes to happen? What's not going to be put in place?
So all 3 season sports. Now,
There would not be a single sport.
Right.
And we just told South Hadley that we would take 2 of their sports.
So again, I think, this is a challenging time. It's obviously a challenging reduction. I think that the conversation can shift to Adam's point about, is 120,000 something that on town meeting floor that the town is willing to put as something back into the school department budget, which they've done in the past. And I think something that, we have to look at how we manage if these reductions do need to happen. There are alternate ways for us to go at that funding. So for example, we are anticipating giving 120-ish thousand from our operating budget back to the town this year. We had anticipated using a majority of that for one-to-one device purchase, Chromebooks for kids, and replenish some laptops for teachers. So because we're giving that back to the town, in addition, a substantial give back in transportation savings because of our work in renegotiating the contract, I think the conversation with the town can be, hey, listen, we've given back in FY20, some of that needs to come back and fund some of these reductions that, we've made to meet the 2% under FY20 numbers.
Yeah,
So
'cause I was just going to say, because if you take that into consideration, that amount that you just gave is really about 1.5%, right? So all in all, if we were to give that back and take a 2%, we're really looking at theoretically a 3.5%. Right? We're
Those are two
giving back money.
different fiscal years.
I get that, but if we were going to, like we typically kept X amount of money at the end of each year to put in towards next year, and then we're also taking a cut at the same time, you kind of have to look at it as, yes, it's 2 separate years, but we pre-funded something, which we're not going to do. And then we cut at the same time, or we reduced. So not paying forward and and reducing are kind of the same thing. You still end up with less money for the next fiscal year.
Maybe partially. I mean, at the end of the day, we should not really lose sight of the essence of the amount that we are reducing, as Adam called it. It has nothing to do with our usual budgeting process. It is really a number that we have to come up with because of the anticipated shortcoming in the state aid. And that's not something that we heard. It's something that we are hearing through the town. And we are really taking an action to make sure that we are prepared for these scenarios. These are, in my mind, these are just scenarios.
yes.
So we are basically creating that 2% reduction scenario, not because it is aligning with our desired budget for next year for educational needs or athletic needs or extracurricular needs. Those are the numbers that we are coming up with because the town is thinking that we're going to be facing some major reduction in state aid. And based on that, that's a scenario that we created. So now, you asked me about some of the questions that I had raised in response to the original version of this. So my question was related to athletics. And to be very honest, it may not catch everyone's eye if we were to reduce something else instead of athletics in this scenario. The reason why it caught my eye is because we are coming out from a stretch where students, were cooped up in their homes. There was a lot of stress, anxiety. I see sports as a way for them to just get engaged in some activity and be able to, reduce that stress and anxiety. It's all good. But also, as I asked the question, I came to understand that fall season may not happen anyway. Right now, the conversation is going in such a direction that the fall athletic season may not even be there. So that's good to know, because now I am not feeling as bad as I did when we first received the initial version of this scenario. Doesn't mean that I will not want to reinstate athletics, however possible, to make sure that we have some way to address the needs of our students. Because I'm assuming, Cheryl, in that amount, we're also including the esports, our esports as well.
Everything.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, so
Well,
those
the
are things,
protocol-
in other words, those are all things that we need to continue to work on. This is just a scenario that we were asked to create, and based on that scenario, we have a list of reductions, and I think that's the discussion that you want us to have tonight.
Right.
I also think that, yes, this is one scenario, and this goes back to what I was saying before. We don't know what other mandates may come from the state or from DESE or from the Fed, which may increase money we have to spend in places that we don't know we have to spend it yet. And then that would make this become even more difficult, right? So there's still a whole lot of information that is lacking.
Look, honestly, the great conversations that we're having at our school committees, and it's not just for us, this is for all school committees. If we can find a way for everyone to really get a little louder and just make a case for the educational system, that will be a lot more beneficial, it seems. Again, this is just an exercise in my mind. And the reason why I'm saying that is because we are hearing everywhere that even the fact that over the last few months, we were forced to switch to this remote learning mode, which we were not familiar with, has already held our students back. We were not prepared for this anywhere in the country. In fact, let me just say, maybe not anywhere, but 99% of the school districts in the country were not prepared to switch to a remote learning mode and be as effective and efficient as they would be in the traditional in-classroom, in-person mode. So the analysis of those who are looking at the educational system is that already we have students who are behind because they did not really get what they were supposed to get in the way we are accustomed to giving it to them. So now I can't imagine that we're going to continue to reduce the educational funding across the country. This is not just Granby, this is not just Massachusetts. And then hold those students back even more. So I think this is one of those times where our advocacy is going to play a huge role. We really have to become a little more vocal and engage our peers across the Commonwealth as well, and just go and explain it this way. This is causing a huge gap in the education of those students. If we're after, the last 3 months where they already had some impact on their education, now we're going to tell them, and by the way, next year, you're not going to get most of the things that you were supposed to get. It doesn't make any sense, and honestly, it's not fair. Again, just I want to make sure that we understand this is not the budget, as Mike said, that we want to propose or we are proposing. This is a budget that we were asked to create, and the items that exist on that list as far as reduction is concerned are those items that the administration team was able to prioritize, and that's our conversation, that's our dialogue tonight.
Right, well, and I understand that, and I have two questions that I don't want to forget, but at the same time, the way this is itemized off, these are the things that are essentially on the chopping block, and athletics is one that's on there with a huge hit. And like you say, Emery, kids have already lost a lot, and then to come back and know that there's nothing for that outlet. We just implemented the esports. We've been adding co-ops and things like that. Like it would be easier to swallow if it was, $60,000 from athletics.
We can't hear you,
Oh,
Jen, or I can't hear you. Jen? Jen, we cannot hear you.
But
is there a way to
Chat with her.
send
Yeah.
her a message?
Oh, is she back?
I
There she
think
is.
I'm back.
Jen, we could not hear
So-
most of the stuff that you said.
And I was on such a good roll.
We could see it and we could feel it, but
That's
we could
always
not
how
hear
it
it.
happens.
I wish I remember what I said. It just seems like it would be easier to see if it was itemized out differently instead of the first line hit to eliminate all of the athletics department, the entire budget. Like that, it just makes it look like that's first swipe, and I understand that we're not looking to just do that, but that's the way it comes across. When the administration and the leadership is looking at it, it's like, axe that. And, we're already hurting the students a lot of students. We're pretty big, for a small school, we're a pretty big athletic school. And, it hurts to see that. And it's.
So let me just say this, we're only funded at 3% over net school spending. There's no extra in this budget. There's none. There's nothing in here. All of these reductions hurt kids, every single one, whether it's sports, whether it's professional development for staff, so teachers have adequate curriculum and professional development, a sped teacher, a 5th grade teacher, facilities, phone, that's safety in our buildings, music, drama, that's our extra, that's our specials teachers. There's nothing here that the leadership team says this should go. All of this needs to be in the budget. But if the money's not there and the town has a parameter that I need to hit, then this is what goes in the budget. I mean, just imagine our pain when the town says they want 5%. Where am I supposed to go?
Yeah.
Where are we supposed to go?
So here's the problem, and
if
this isn't new to this administration. We've been running on understaffing for so many years. We've also been running on constantly cutting when we don't really have anywhere to cut, because it's just a cycle. We want to spend more on our students. Our future relies on our students. We cannot give, and I've noticed this with Granby, it's a long time because some people want things a certain way, and then you have others that are on fixed income, so they don't want to contribute. This is the future. And this has been for many years like this. So it's hard to cut when you can't cut.
And is this,
unfortunately, if it's not $120,000 in athletics, it's 2 teachers from classrooms that we can certainly ill afford to cut. So unfortunately, yes, we didn't put athletics at the top of the list for any particular reason, but yes, $120,000 in athletics probably is a high priority that we don't want to see cut. But if it's not athletics, then it's essentially 2 teaching positions, which if we can't cut athletics, we certainly can't cut 2 teaching positions any more than we can cut athletics.
So I don't want to make light of the concerns around cutting anything, right? I mean, right now, as great as we've done over the last few years, and as good as we looked going into this year, some of this is not anything that we can control or see coming. And I honestly think that if certain things happen a certain way, we actually stand to be okay. But that being said, does it really matter the order of that sheet? I mean,
No, it's in no order.
No.
So if it came down to something where we had to 8%, I'm sure there will still be some trade-offs and things being looked at right up until the last minute.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe even beyond the last minute, like still trying to fund one season of something. I mean, I don't know this, but I just know the way that the district leadership has worked in the past, where even if it's off the table, it's not really necessarily completely gone until it's passed, right? I mean, that's kind of the sense I got. They'll continue to try to figure out a way to get to it, especially when it comes to a reduction and trying to replace that reduction. So I personally don't think I'm that worked up with the order of what's on this spreadsheet. To me, it's just a list. You could move a couple things around and call it the biggest to the smallest. You could reverse it, but everything on that list, I don't think would go. Even if we had to hit the 2%, this is just kind of a starting point as to how to make that budget work.
it's not the order, it's the amount. It's just, that it wipes out an entire thing.
Oh, I get that, and there's nothing I like about that
It could
either.
be the last thing on the list, it's still the biggest amount, right?
Yeah. But to that though, I mean, where else? I mean, knowing that everything up to a few years ago has already been cut, like I personally don't know of where else we can find certain sizable amounts of money. I really hate to say it that way, but that's what it is.
Well,
I
just
understand that. I'm just projecting my pain because, there's,
Yes, I feel your pain.
And I don't want to.
And here I am again with a kid that it impacts directly. And it's very hard to sit here and, I worked my butt off for a long time to be able to get a co-op established for, to help. I was instrumental in getting this co-op established for swim. And now she's a freshman and it's going away, potentially going away. Not first thing necessarily, but it's an area that's
I get it, and
I mean, all of these cuts will impact every student directly, no matter if it's athletics, if it's cutting maintenance and supplies, if it's cutting the evaluation software that we use. It's gonna affect every kid directly, no matter what the cut is.
Adam, do you mind if I ask a few questions about that amount? Does it?
Yeah.
What is included in that 120? And the reason why I'm asking
Okay,
is
so
because I know that we have different items that we talk about when it comes to sports. There is, you know, the
Mhm.
coaches, there is transportation, but also we have funds that are coming in that the students are paying to be able to play the sports. So how does that number reflect all those different variables?
So again, it doesn't. These numbers don't reflect any type of revenue. They're only reflecting reducing our operating budget. So our athletics, it costs us about $120,000 or so to run athletics. That includes the athletic director stipend, the assistant AD, all of the stipends for the coaches, field supplies, gym supplies, anything you could think of that's associated with athletics, aside from transportation, because that's a separate town article, is in that $120,000.
So no transportation is in there. That's purely on the operating side.
It's purely operating because, again, that transportation article is a total separate article voted on at town meeting.
Okay. So based on what we know currently, what would be the revenue to our athletic revolving funds?
It varies. It's about, I would say, on a yearly basis, about between $40,000 and $50,000 we see, you know, as revenue for athletics. I think this year it was last year end it was around 50. We were trending around 50, you know, this year until obviously everything came to a halt. But it's around that number.
So a little less than half of that amount that we're looking at right now, not necessarily all the time, but typically gets covered by the fees that we are receiving from the players. Is that correct?
Yeah. A lot of that offsets the athletic budget. Correct.
Okay.
So,
All right. So that's good to know, because that may, as Mike was saying, that may allow us to, you know, play around with some of those figures, and we really have to figure. I understand that this is a cut or reduction, and an artificial one at that, because we're asked to really, again, come up with these scenarios. When it comes to line items that may have its own revenue generation, I would like to also understand that, so that we can see what we may be able to do with it in the future.
Right. So again, after we get past, I guess, tonight and all these discussions, I'll start to build all of that stuff in there. All that Cheryl and I did was just get to a number that we had to cut to satisfy the town's request. And then once we kind of navigate through that, we all agree, disagree, however we come about it, then I'll start to build in how revenue is going to impact our overall budget for the start of next year.
so I'm a
I
little
have a
confused.
question.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Jen.
Just looking at the list for the grade 5 teacher, is that the position that's a long-term sub right now? So then there would only be one 5th grade teacher?
No, in the FY21 proposal, we had a placeholder for the 3rd, 5th grade. So those.
Okay, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just,
Yeah.
that's suddenly a very large.
Yeah, that would be a problem. Yeah.
Okay, and the drama and the band, is that for just the high school, or is that for where is that position?
That is a shared position with the high school and East Meadow.
Okay.
But that one, yeah, that's the one that even if the town came to us and said we needed to have this 2% cut, we were going to try to fund through the revolving account anyway.
Correct.
So, okay. Now, I got a little confused, Adam. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
120,000 with athletics. when we say 50,000 or so based on student payments, does that mean the total hit to the school is closer to 80,000, or is the total hit to the school closer to 170,000?
Yeah, so right now in the budget, it's athletics in total would cost about $150,000 to operate. I have about $31,000 currently in the budget as offsets. So yeah, again, we were, the last few years, it's been between 40 and 50. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but it's between about 40 and 50. We were, again, trending this year to around $50,000. So that number could fluctuate to $120,000 in athletics. Again, these are not concrete numbers, but yeah, there's some wiggle room. Maybe athletics is $100,000, to your point, Mike. But yeah, essentially, I projected about $30,000 in revenue for athletics for this year.
So then what happens with that revolving money of, say, $50,000 that we have at the end of this year? I mean, where I'm going with this is it still possible where even if we cut the $120,000 from the budget for athletics, with what we have sitting in the revolving account for athletics at the end of this year, plus looking at the fee structure of what we can do for next year, plus what we may even be allowed to do from the state, like we might not have a fall league of any sort, but maybe a winter basketball league. Is there a way where we could still might be able to fund something through this revolving account plus any playing around with the fee structure for next year? I'm just trying to get a sense of some of that.
Yeah, not really. So what that revolving, the athletic revolving offsets is paying officials, paying clock operators, some miscellaneous staff for games. And unfortunately for Allie, for the last few years, she's kind of operated that budget at 100% each year. So there wouldn't be any balance that we'd be able to use to save a part of athletics.
Okay. I'm just asking. I'm trying to think through as many of these scenarios.
Yeah, nope. Yep. And again, this is kind of a side point, but again, that's a good point, because a couple of the discussions we were having are increasing user fees. That's why we wanted to get the fences up on the baseball and softball field so we could bring some advertising and generate some extra revenue where Allie's not operating in the red, year after year, and athletics can, sustain itself partially, but we're just not at that point yet.
One more point that I wouldn't want us to forget about. We're talking about a 2% reduction to our current fiscal year budget. Remember that our budget for fiscal year 2021 was actually a lot higher because our net school spending to begin with was higher. So when you add all those numbers together, the gap that we're looking at is, what is it, $500,000, if not more?
Mhm.
It's 560, almost $560,000 of gap we're talking about. So while we are, again, we should be concerned about the magnitude of the cut, even based on this current year's budget, but we should not forget that there was a lot more in that budget to be able to do a lot of different things that we've been discussing over the course of last so many years. We did not even get to chat about that with the select board or finance committee yet because this crisis hit us. So now we are finding ourselves in a situation where we're talking about a 2% reduction to current year budget. But we should remember that we had a different budget for 2021. And when we look at that one, the hit is really over $500,000.
The other question I would have, Adam or Cheryl, you've talked about these two highlighted, possibly using revolving. Have you talked more about using revolving for some of these other reductions instead of just those two? And I know you want to keep it on rainy day, but we don't know what the future holds.
So again, and I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Cheryl and I have not brought in any revenue to this because we don't know what the revenue is going to be. The town asked us to give them a 2% reduction. We came up with that amount. We haven't, I don't even know at this point how we're going to fund anything else, essentially. I don't even know how we're going to fund what's not on the cut list at this point. But again, after tonight, once we kind of know the direction we want to go, I'll start bringing all that revenue in. The problem is there's going to be a reduction in circuit breaker. We're not sure how much that reduction is going to be. We're assuming there's going to be a reduction in school choice. We're not sure how much that reduction is going to be. So the point of this exercise was to satisfy the town's request with a number and then build into what we need to fund the bare minimum for fiscal year 21.
Okay,
And then I think the purpose of tonight's meeting was to inform the school committee through this venue of what this looks like for if and when this, these cuts, make it out to the town, because there probably will be a lot of talk.
Right. Well, and I think, this was, I also believe, in preparation for the joint meeting. Clearly we're not the only department, and all of the departments have been asked for these reductions. And to Jim's point about the revenue side, as I've said all along, in 2008, the federal government came out with ERA funds in a very similar recession. Granby received almost $500,000. So as much as this is incredibly unsettling, we don't have enough information really to understand the revenue picture, and how much of this, if any of it, is actually going to have to be executed. We're already notified that we are receiving CARES Act money, which is based on our Title I, which certainly has requirements around how we can spend that money, but it will offset for us ways that we intervene with students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged. And we're also applying for FEMA and MEMA grants, which are disaster relief grants around technology and anything that we needed to flip the switch to go to remote learning. So again, to Adam's point, we just don't have all of those numbers yet. Yes, this is devastating. Yes, when you see it, it is alarming, but we're very early we're late, but early in developing FY21. And this is the quandary that the town is in. We just don't have any information on what the revenue picture is going to be.
Is this inclusive of the 305, or is it because the 305 was in the fiscal year 20 budget? Did we ever get that sorted out?
So again, I just want to be clear. This number does not take into account revenue. This is a number based on our operating budget, the total amount that it would cost to run the district, and then the formula is applied to that. Revenue is not considered into this. So to your point now, Jen, if the town then said, well, we're going to take all, a portion, or none of it, that's going to play into how we build the remaining budget. But this number, no revenue is built into this. This is just the number for the town, and then again, we'll have to build in the revenue and how we're going to fund everything else.
what is the projected contractual savings? What is that? How are you saving? What's that?
Yeah, so it's that's kind of a tough one, because we were in the midst of negotiating with Unit A, right? We had built in a dollar amount that we would have essentially negotiated on. Well, all of that is frozen now. So the savings is essentially not agreeing or negotiating a contract with them. Now in December, when we might negotiate and come to an agreement, we're gonna have to figure out a way, if there is retro, all that stuff, we may have to pay that back.
Right, okay.
At this point, we don't know. Yeah,
Right.
At this point, we don't know. So that's the projected savings today that we have because we did negotiate.
Okay, fair. Well, I know. I mean, I know this is difficult. I mean, no one wants to cut or reduce anything, but when you don't have the money, you've got to sit there and wait for someone else to offer something so you don't have to, because it certainly is difficult. I know, I've been there, done that, and I know Cheryl and Adam and all your administrative team, it's not a fun time when you have to do things like this, because they're here for a reason. They do things to help kids and help teachers and help the community. And when you have to do this, it's just awful. And it's, you know, I understand athletics is difficult, but yet then you have to sit there and say, well, you got to find 120,000 or 60,000 somewhere else. And that's the bottom line. It's not a fun thing. Not a fun thing at all.
So did we have anything more we wanted to talk about this? One thing I did see, Kim mentioned that she saw the visitors' comments on our agenda. I don't have the agenda in front of me. I just want to make sure we're okay with allowing visitor comments for those that do wish to speak. I just don't want to, like, I don't see an issue with it myself.
That's fine. It's your call, Mike. Go ahead.
Okay, but I mean, I just want to make sure we're done with this discussion before I move on to that.
So just to wrap up, my understanding is that I'll now formally, in good form, or I'm going to share this with Chris. My understanding is that there'll be a joint meeting, I think, to go over all of the departments and where we sit. And, you know, hopefully we will have a little bit more direction in terms of revenue from the state. And also from, you know, if there's anything that comes from the federal government as well. So we would be looking for the joint meeting at this point.
Okay. Now, again,
And I
Oh, go
I
ahead.
should have probably asked this. I should have probably asked this at the beginning, and I'll ask it now. But I'm not sure. And Cheryl and I talked about this. The way we got to the number, is anyone? And I don't want to say questioning because it's inaccurate. But does anyone have any questions on how we got to that number? Because even I would ask Cheryl 10 times, like, "This is the way I'm doing it. Is it confusing? Does it make sense? Is this the right number?" So I just want to make sure before we move forward with this, if anyone has a question or would like me to explain how we got to the approximately $560,000 of cuts, or does it make sense to everybody?
I have a question. So these
Sure.
cuts are based on an annual amount, or, because I'm not understanding, they want us to cut the FY20 number, right?
Yeah, so let me try to explain it before you ask your question, and then I'm sure you're going to have questions as to how I explain it. Does that work?
Yep.
Okay. So what the town requested, and it gets kind of confusing because they say cut your FY20 budget for FY21. So what they want is a 2% cut on what our FY20 budget was, right? And then use that number as our FY21 budget. Okay. So what we did was we took our operating budget for FY20. That was everything it takes to operate the district, less transportation. So we didn't include transportation in that. It's a separate town article that it's not part of our essentially operating budget. 2% on our FY20 operating budget was the approximate $188,000 you can see at the top right of the sheet. Okay.
Yep.
We then reduced the FY20 operating budget by that amount, which is the 188. It comes out to $9.2 million. Our operating budget, what it would cost us to run the district in FY21 is that $9.78 million. So the difference of what it's going to cost us in FY21 to run the district and a 2% cut to our FY20 operating budget is where that approximate $560,000 comes in.
Okay.
So they basically said, we're going to do just a flat amount going into next year, except reduce it by 2%.
And so, and again, so this is where I think there may still be some questions unanswered as to what amount we should be cutting from. But at least in this instance, this is the highest amount of cuts that there could be. Now, if they come back and give us a lesser amount that they want us to cut from, we can add a few of these things back in and take them off of the reductions list. But this is the highest amount that we could reduce from our budget at 2% based on the parameters that they gave us.
Can I ask one other question back on the list there, the supply list? 32,000.
Yep.
So what is still left in the supply account to purchase? I assume those are educational supplies?
Yeah, so those are supplies from each of the schools. There's some district-wide supplies that are not district-wide. They're essentially either professional development supplies, maybe some special education supplies. But that gives the schools each $15,000 to spend next year for supplies. They were up around $25,000, $30,000 to spend next year for supplies. Again, to Mike's point, where it's kind of a double edge, with some of the surplus at the end of FY20, we could get a jump on some supplies for next year. We can't reduce it and then also give back a portion, if any, of our surplus. It's, to Mike's point, it's kind of hitting us twice. But yes, that's district-wide and district-wide supplies and at each location.
Okay, thank you. It's not good either. They're all not good, but. What's the timeline, do you know now? Cheryl, have any idea of the upcoming timeline? No?
No, we had requested the joint meeting and then this parameter came out. So I would anticipate rather quickly between now and, June 30th.
Yeah, okay.
Jen, did that answer some of your questions?
Yeah.
I have the same. Yeah.
Because I've been like looking to see, because I go on and I'll see what type of, and you're right, there's nothing out there on how they're going to finish this year and go into next year. Because I keep looking and waiting and because even where I work, we're trying to figure it out.
And to be honest with you, there's other smaller amounts on this budget that I question, like map testing. Is this really a good time to be cutting map testing when we're going to figure out where kids are?
It isn't. We keep map testing. It's a portion of the professional development that we were going to continue with. So, but we will still map test.
But again, I saw some things in there that raised my eyebrows too, but I figured the exercise here was to show what we would need to be looking at if we indeed needed to cut the 2% as the town was asking. My hope is that cooler heads prevail, more information comes out, and we're able to make a much more informed decision before we have to. That's my hope. Not going to hold my breath, but that's my hope.
Yeah, and what we see.
And again, the goal was to stay out of the classroom as much and as far as we could as we went down this list. And I think we did a pretty good job. Again, some of the amounts, $10,000 for map testing, $8,000 for district-wide travel. You add some of those up, that could be a position. So we tried our hardest to stay out of the classroom when we came up with this list.
Okay, and the problem though is as we all know, a lot of these cuts, instructing a whole child is not just in the classroom. It's pretty important, I get it, but there's a lot more to the development of kids than just sitting in a classroom. We all know this. I'm not going to go down that road too much. Yeah,
and if I could add, I think we also don't have information and guidance on how we're going to reopen. So if there is Board of Health and Department of Public Health and CDC regulation around how many students can be in a classroom, how close they can be, whether or not they can eat lunch, whether they can travel throughout the building, that is going to impact the cost of educating students next year. In addition, additional PPEs for staff, for students who forget theirs, the thermometer, the infrared thermometers, there's a whole host of things that we're talking about at the leadership team that are going to be cost added to the budget just to get the schools open and be fiscally responsible. So, we're trying to do two things at the same time, and they're really counterintuitive, but we'll do our best.
Okay. So if everybody's all set, I do want to move into the visitor comments, and I know Kim had raised her hand when she came in. Jen, can you run this? I just know that Kim, I just happened to see that chat pop up. I'm not good at looking at chats. I'm probably gonna close.
I don't know if Kim is there. We'll let her go first, and then we can ask for others. I know there was a couple other people that had mentioned something.
Okay. So
Kim, are
Kim,
you
if you're
there?
there.
I'm
Good.
here, thank you. Thanks for letting me talk. Kim Goldsmith, 239 Taylor Street. I had written this because I thought we were going to speak before you guys, so it might be a little out of context, but I'm sure you'll follow along fine. So I wanted to talk about the fact that we're going to hear about major budget cuts tonight as the state is making large cuts. Granby Public School District's biggest expense is staffing. I'm curious and hoping it will be asked and explained in greater detail why we as a district haven't discussed furloughing or part-time unemployment for the many paraprofessionals who don't have student day-to-day duties, 8:30 to 2:30, specials teachers or custodians. Many districts in surrounding towns such as Ludlow, Chicopee, and Belchertown have taken similar measurements in anticipation of the drastic cuts that are to come. If we are not furloughing positions, can I ask what these staff members are doing daily from 8:30 to 2:30? It would seem to make more sense to temporarily collect unemployment from the state than to burden our town. And I'm just assuming that if things like this were done, it would help with savings from this year to put towards our schooling next year. And that's all. Thank you.
All right. Judy DeLong? You might be on mute, Judy.
Hello. Hi there. This is Judy from Granby to Go. I had a question. We've had a lot of families come forward having help with getting state aid and also food from the pantries and everything, the surrounding pantries. Would that make the school district more eligible for any type of grants or anything if that count has gone up?
I think it's just comments. We don't usually answer, just so we appreciate your comments.
Okay.
I would say though, if you have a specific comment, you could probably reach out to, hate to put her on the spot, but maybe Cheryl
Okay.
can get you in the right direction.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
And then I think Stephanie Parent is next.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mike, for letting us talk out of order. I just really quickly, I had something really nice written, but at this point, it's kind of all out the window. I'm kind of alarmed with, of course, like mostly with the cut for sports, because I feel like we've had many budget cuts, and it seems like the first thing to go is typically sports, and then the town does rally because no one wants their sports cut. But I'm just curious if we're going to talk about any other possibilities. I know after the vote for not moving 6th grade to the high school, I had anticipated hearing further conversation about utilizing other spots in the building. One in particular that stood out to me is a possibility of restructuring preschool, because one of our preschool teachers did quit in the beginning of 2020 to go to another district, leaving a long-term sub in her position. And it seems like with the cuts going on, it would also just make sense to explore maybe combining to one class or something we could do, as that wouldn't be an immediate, furlough of any employee necessarily, because they're already they've already left. Another thing, once again, like not that we want to go down this road, but the dean position was temporary just this year. And I just feel like I really hope that we're looking at absolutely all options besides just, it seems to be the go-to to cut sports. It's just really discouraging. I think for a lot of town people, that's been unfortunately the go-to, because I totally agree that, you know, the town does not give nearly what they should to the school, but it's just, I think would be very disappointing for kids to come back, given everything, and then not have any sort of outlet to go to. So that was all I had. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you. And I do have to ask Cheryl, are these reductions going to be posted someplace for people to see? I believe I saw somebody asking where they could see it, but I understand that the biggest, one of the biggest things is to get it in front of the school committee tonight first, so we could see it.
Correct.
So I just wanted to ask about the timeline on that, where people could find it.
My timeline would be the joint meeting, so we have a better understanding of what they are talking about in terms of the parameters, and whether or not we have some numbers around net school spending for FY21.
Okay. All right, so if that was everything on the agenda and we've gotten through all of the comments, take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Nobody wants to go home?
I'll second that, Mike.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? All right, I guess we're back on next week.